Don't start lying to me. We know your type uses fake names to hide.
My name is Judge Angelique Jones. You have no warrant.
Yeah, and I'm supposed to believe that? You think that title protects you?
You're violating the law.
At 6:49 a.m., inside a private recovery room at St. Clement's Medical Center, two ICE agents in full tactical gear forced open the door and walked in on a black woman lying in a hospital bed. The woman was Judge Angelique Jones, 54, a sitting United States Federal District Court judge for the Eastern District of Virginia. She had undergone emergency surgery just 14 hours earlier. She was connected to an IV drip, a heart monitor, and a post-operative drainage tube. She could not stand. She could barely lift her arms. The lead agent, Vincent Graff, walked straight to the bed and grabbed her wrist. His partner, Samuel Denton, stood at the foot of the bed and demanded identification. Neither agent had a warrant. Neither had verified who was in the room. Neither had spoken to a single doctor or nurse before entering. The hospital security camera in the hallway captured both of them walking in. The body camera mounted on Graff's chest was recording, and what it would capture over the next several minutes would trigger a federal investigation, end multiple careers, and become one of the most viewed clips of law enforcement abuse in the country. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you absolutely do not want to miss. To understand how outrageous this moment truly was, you need to know who was lying in that hospital bed. Judge Angelique Jones was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and raised by a single mother named Eileen, who cleaned office buildings at night so her daughter could attend school during the day. Angelique graduated top of her class at Howard University, then earned her law degree from Yale, where she made law review. She clerked for a United States Supreme Court justice, spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor handling civil rights cases, then moved into private litigation, where she spent 6 more years representing victims of unlawful detention and government overreach. When the president nominated her to the federal bench, the Senate confirmed her 94-6. She was known for her sharp legal mind, her fairness to both sides, and her unflinching willingness to hold law enforcement accountable when they violated the Constitution. In the 18 months before that hospital room door was forced open, Judge Jones had ruled against unlawful ICE detentions 3 separate times, ordering the release of detained immigrants, and issuing written opinions that called out what she described as a pattern of constitutional indifference within the agency. She was deeply respected in the legal community. She was also deeply resented by certain agencies who did not appreciate being told they had to follow the law. And on that morning, lying in a hospital gown with surgical tubes still in her body, she became the target of the very kind of abuse she had spent her entire career fighting against. Agent Vincent Graff was 42 years old and had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 16 years. He had built a reputation inside the agency as someone who got results. But the way he got those results had left a trail of damage that his supervisors chose to ignore. Over the past 9 years, 11 formal complaints had been filed against Graff by detained individuals alleging excessive force, verbal abuse, and racial targeting. Every single one had been reviewed internally and dismissed. Colleagues described him as someone who doesn't ask twice. That phrase was meant as a compliment inside certain circles of the agency. What it really meant was that Graff used intimidation as a first resort, force as a second, and paperwork as a way to clean up whatever mess came after. His partner, Agent Samuel Denton, was 36 years old with 8 years on the job. Denton was a follower. He deferred to Graff on every call, every decision, every confrontation. He didn't challenge, he didn't question. He watched and he complied. On 2 prior occasions, Denton had stood by while Graff escalated the use of force against detained individuals. Both incidents were caught on surveillance footage. Both were buried by supervisors who decided the complaints weren't worth pursuing. Together, Graff and Denton had been dispatched to St. Clement's Medical Center based on a single anonymous tip. The caller claimed that an undocumented woman was recovering at the hospital under a false identity. The tip included a room number. No one at the field office verified the tip. No one checked hospital records. No one contacted the facility. No one obtained a warrant. The room number belonged to Judge Angelique Jones. Graff pushed the door open without knocking. Denton followed a step behind. The room was dim, the blinds still drawn, the only light coming from the glow of the heart monitor and the IV pump beside the bed. Judge Jones lay under a thin hospital blanket, her gown visible at the collar, tubes running from her arm and her side. She was groggy from pain medication administered just 2 hours earlier. Her eyes opened slowly as the door swung wide and 2 men in tactical vests stepped inside. Graff didn't wait. He announced that they were federal agents with ICE and demanded she identify herself. Jones blinked, her mind working through the fog of medication. She said her name. She said she was a federal judge. Graff looked at Denton and let out a short laugh. "Sure you are." He told Denton to check the bed and her personal items. Denton moved to the side of the room and began going through her overnight bag, pulling out clothing, toiletries, and a book. Her judicial credentials, her federal ID, and her personal phone were inside a locked drawer built into the bedside table. Graff pointed at it. "Open that." Jones's voice was strained but clear. "No, I don't consent to a search. You don't have a warrant." Graff leaned closer. "You don't have rights right now. You have instructions." The heart monitor began to spike. The beeping quickened, filling the small room with a rhythm that matched the rising tension. Out in the hallway, a nurse heard raised voices coming from a room that was supposed to be quiet. A room that held a post-surgical patient who was not supposed to be disturbed for any reason. She turned and started walking toward the door. The door opened and Nurse Priscilla Duval stepped inside. Duval was 58 years old and had worked at St. Clement's for 28 years. She had seen families fall apart in these rooms. She had held the hands of patients who didn't make it through the night. She had never once allowed anyone to compromise the safety of someone in her care, and she was not about to start now. She looked at the 2 agents standing over her patient and spoke immediately. "You need to stop. This woman is a post-surgical patient. She cannot be disturbed, moved, or agitated. She is under medical supervision, and I need you to step away from the bed right now." Graff turned to face her. His expression didn't change. "Leave the room. This is a federal matter." Duval didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm calling hospital security and the attending physician. You are not authorized to be in here." Graff took a step toward her. "Interfering with a federal operation is a crime. You can be arrested right here, right now. Do you understand that?" Duval met his eyes and did not flinch. "Then arrest me. But you are not touching my patient again until someone with legal authority tells me otherwise." Denton shifted his position and moved to block the doorway, standing with his arms folded across his chest. Behind him, the hallway was still and quiet. But not for long. From the bed, Judge Jones's voice cut through the tension. It was strained from pain, but steady and deliberate. "I am a United States Federal District Court judge. You are in my hospital room without a warrant. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. Leave immediately." Graff didn't even look at her. He reached toward her wrist, pulling a zip tie from his belt. The moment his hand closed around her arm and pulled, Jones gasped. The movement sent a sharp jolt through her surgical site. Her body tensed, her face twisted. The heart monitor screamed. The alarm filled the room with a high-pitched, continuous tone that carried through the open doorway and down the corridor. Within seconds, footsteps were coming from every direction. Medical staff were running. "Doctor!" Solomon Osai came through the door at a pace that made Denton step aside before he could think about it. Osai was the attending surgeon who had operated on Judge Jones the night before. He was tall, composed, and not a man who raised his voice unless the situation demanded it. This situation demanded it. He moved directly between Graff and the bed and placed himself there like a wall. "Do not touch my patient again. If you put your hands on her one more time, I will call 911 and this hospital's legal department at the same time, and you will explain to both of them why a post-surgical woman is being physically handled by 2 men with no medical authority and no warrant." Graff opened his mouth to respond, but Osai was not finished. "Step back. Now." 2 hospital security guards appeared in the doorway, both breathing hard from the sprint down the corridor. One of them spoke immediately. Do you have a warrant? Show us a warrant or identify your legal authority to be in this room.
Graf straightened. We don't need a warrant. We're acting on credible intelligence regarding an undocumented individual in this facility. Dr. Osei shook his head slowly. This woman is Judge Angelique Jones. She has been my patient for 2 years. She is a United States citizen. She is a federal judge. And you are standing in her recovery room harassing her after major surgery. For the first time since entering the room, Graf hesitated. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved from Osei to the security guards to Duval and then back to the bed where Jones lay with tears running down her face, one hand pressing against her surgical site. Denton leaned in and whispered, "We need to go." Graf shook his head. "We need to confirm her story." He pulled his radio from his vest and keyed the channel, calling his field office for verification. While he waited for a response, he looked at Denton and gave a short nod toward the door. "Stand there. Nobody in or out until I get confirmation." Denton moved to the doorway and planted himself. A sitting United States Federal District Court judge was now being physically detained in her own hospital bed by 2 ICE agents who had no warrant, no verified intelligence, and no legal ground to stand on. The hallway security camera recorded every second. Patients in neighboring rooms stood in their doorways watching. Staff members lined the corridor, and the body camera on Vincent Graf's chest kept blinking red, capturing everything from his own perspective, building the evidence that would eventually destroy him. While Graf stood at the foot of the bed waiting for his field office to respond, the hospital's chief administrator was 3 floors up making a phone call that would change the course of everything. The administrator had been briefed by security within minutes of the alarm going off. When she heard the words, "federal judge," she didn't call the police. She didn't call ICE. She called the United States Marshals Service, the agency specifically responsible for the protection of federal judges. Within 12 minutes, Deputy U.S. Marshal Franklin Yates was on the phone with the hospital. He confirmed Judge Jones was assigned to the Eastern District of Virginia. He confirmed she was a sitting Article III judge. He confirmed there was no active warrant, no detainer, no federal order of any kind associated with her name. Within 20 minutes, 2 marshals walked through the front entrance of St. Clement's Medical Center, badges displayed, sidearms holstered, and moved directly to the 3rd-floor recovery wing. When they entered the room, Graf was still standing at the foot of Jones's bed. Denton was still blocking the doorway. Dr. Osei was still positioned between Graf and his patient. The heart monitor was still beeping faster than it should have been. Marshal Yates stepped forward and identified himself. He looked at Judge Jones, asked her to confirm her name, her title, and her district. She did. The verification took less than 90 seconds. Then Yates turned to Graf. His voice was calm and controlled, but every word carried weight. "You are standing in the hospital room of a sitting Article III federal judge, without a warrant, after physically touching her against her will. Do you understand what you've done?" Graf's mouth opened. He started to speak. He mentioned the anonymous tip. He said his field office had dispatched them. He said they were following protocol. Yates cut him off. "Step into the hallway. Now." Denton moved immediately. He dropped his arms, stepped out of the doorway, and stood against the corridor wall without a word. Graf lingered. He looked at the marshals, then at Dr. Osei, then at Jones. Then he turned and walked out. The marshals secured the room. Nurse Duval returned to the bedside. Judge Jones was shaking. Her face was wet with tears. Her hand was pressed against her side where the surgical site had been pulled during the struggle. A dark stain was beginning to spread beneath the bandage. Dr. Osei leaned over her and looked at the wound. He straightened and called for an emergency wound reevaluation. The bleeding had started again. Within the hour, the hospital moved with a precision that matched the severity of what had just happened. The chief administrator issued a legal hold on all security footage from the 3rd-floor recovery wing, the hallway cameras, the entrance lobby, and the elevator corridors. Every frame, from every angle, was preserved and locked. No one could access, edit, or delete a single second of it without authorization from the hospital's legal counsel.
The U.S. Marshals flagged the body camera footage from Graff's chest unit for immediate federal preservation. A formal request was sent to ICE's Evidence Management Division, demanding the footage be secured and copied before anyone in Graff's chain of command could review or alter it. Nurse Priscilla Duval sat down at the nursing station and wrote a detailed incident report. She documented the time the agents entered, what they said, how they spoke to her patient, the threat Graff made against her personally, and the moment he grabbed Judge Jones's wrist hard enough to cause her to cry out and trigger the heart monitor alarm. She signed it and submitted it to hospital administration before her shift ended. Dr. Osei documented everything from the medical side: the reopened surgical wound, the elevated heart rate, the spike in blood pressure, the trauma response visible in a patient who had been stable and resting just 1 hour before the agents forced their way in. He noted that the physical confrontation had set back her recovery and introduced a risk of infection at the surgical site. 3 other patients on the floor provided witness statements. One described hearing a woman crying and a man yelling. Another described 2 men in tactical gear blocking a doorway while nurses tried to get through. A third said she heard someone say the words, "You're hurting me," and that the voice sounded weak, like someone who could barely speak. But the piece of evidence that would travel the farthest didn't come from a hospital camera or a body cam. A janitor named Terrence Hollis had been mopping the hallway outside Judge Jones's room when the agents entered. When the voices got loud, he pulled out his phone and hit record. The video was 40 seconds long. It showed Graff through the open doorway gripping Judge Jones's wrist while she lay in the bed. Her voice was audible. "You're hurting me. I just had surgery." The clip was shaky and the angle was narrow, but the image was clear enough and the words were loud enough to leave no room for doubt. That 40-second video would eventually reach millions of views and become the single most watched piece of footage from the entire case. The U.S. Marshals didn't wait. Before Judge Jones's wound had even been rebandaged, a formal notification was sent to the Department of Justice in Washington. The report was flagged urgent. It described the warrantless entry into a hospital room, the physical detention of a sitting Article III federal judge, the use of force against a post-surgical patient, and the presence of body camera footage and multiple witnesses. Within hours, the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility opened a preliminary inquiry. The file was assigned priority status, and a team of federal investigators was designated to handle it. That same afternoon, the Chief Judge of the Eastern District of Virginia was personally briefed by phone. He listened without interruption. When the briefing was finished, he issued an internal memo to the entire court system. The language was direct and unsparing. He called the incident a fundamental violation of judicial independence and constitutional protection, and stated that the physical assault and detention of a federal judge in a medical facility by agents operating without legal authority represented a direct threat to the functioning of the judiciary itself. The Federal Judges Association, a body that rarely made public statements, released one that evening. It expressed what it called grave alarm at the reported physical detention of a sitting federal judge without a warrant, without probable cause, and without any legal basis. Congressional offices began receiving calls from constituents, advocacy groups, and legal organizations. By evening, cable news had picked up the janitor's phone video. The 40-second clip played on loop across every major network. The image of a woman in a hospital bed saying, "You're hurting me," while a man in tactical gear gripped her wrist was impossible to explain away, impossible to spin, impossible to ignore. ICE headquarters in Washington scrambled. A public affairs team drafted a statement saying the agency was aware of the incident and was reviewing the circumstances. Internally, the tone was very different. Senior officials were furious, not at what had happened to Judge Jones, but at the exposure. The anonymous tip that had triggered the entire operation was traced within days. It had come from a burner phone. The number had no registered owner. Investigators quickly began to suspect the tip was retaliatory. Just 6 weeks earlier, Judge Jones had issued a ruling ordering the release of 14 detained asylum seekers after finding that ICE had held them in violation of due process. Her written opinion had included a line that had circulated widely within the agency and had made her no friends. She had described what she called a pattern of constitutional indifference embedded in the agency's enforcement culture. Someone, investigators believed, had decided to make her pay for those words, and they had used a phone with no name attached to do it. Federal investigators received the full body camera footage from Graff's chest unit 3 days after the incident. The file was 22 minutes long. It was reviewed in a secure room at the DOJ by a team of attorneys and civil rights investigators. What they saw was devastating. The footage began in the hospital corridor. Graff and Denton walked side by side toward the room. Just before reaching the door, Graff leaned slightly toward Denton and spoke in a lowered voice. The body camera microphone picked it up clearly. Another one, using a fake name. These people always have a story. Investigators paused the footage and replayed that line 4 times. They flagged the phrase, "these people," and marked the timestamp. The footage continued. Graff pushed the door open without knocking. The camera captured the dim room, the monitors, the IV stand, and Judge Jones lying in the bed, eyes barely open. Graff announced himself and demanded identification. Jones responded. She gave her name. She said she was a federal judge. The camera recorded Graff's reaction. The short laugh, the words, "Sure you are," spoken with a dismissiveness that would be replayed in courtrooms and on television for months. The footage showed Denton going through her overnight bag. It showed Graff ordering her to unlock the bedside drawer. It captured her refusal and his response. "You don't have rights right now. You have instructions." It captured Nurse Duval entering the room and telling them to stop. It captured Graff threatening to arrest her for interfering with a federal operation. It captured the moment Graff reached for Judge Jones's wrist with the zip tie, the gasp of pain, the sharp movement that pulled at her surgical wound, and the heart monitor alarm that followed. It captured Dr. Osei entering and positioning himself between the agent and the bed. It captured Graff refusing to leave. It captured him ordering Denton to guard the door. And it captured the arrival of the U.S. Marshals, the verification of Jones's identity, and Marshal Yates telling Graff exactly what he had done. Every second of it was recorded by Graff's own equipment, from his own perspective, in high definition with clear audio. Investigators cross-referenced the footage with ICE's internal dispatch records. What they found deepened the case significantly. Over the previous 4 years, Graff had been involved in 94 field operations. Of those, 78 had targeted Black or Latino individuals. The pattern was overwhelming and consistent. Taken together with the whispered comment before entering the room, it painted a picture of racial bias that was not incidental, but systematic. The footage and the dispatch records were compiled into a sealed evidence package and shared with the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. The investigation was no longer just about what happened in one hospital room. It was about how long it had been allowed to happen everywhere else. ICE moved fast, but not fast enough to stay ahead of the damage. Within 48 hours, both Graff and Denton were placed on immediate, unpaid suspension. Their credentials were confiscated, their firearms were collected, their access to federal systems was revoked. But the fallout didn't stop with the 2 agents. It climbed upward. Investigators pulled the internal dispatch log and found the name of the man who had approved the operation. Agent in charge, Rodney Sloan, 51, a field supervisor with 19 years at ICE, had received the anonymous tip, logged it, and authorized the hospital entry. He did not verify the tip. He did not request a warrant. He did not contact the hospital. He did not run a basic check on the room's occupant, a step that would have taken less than 5 minutes and would have immediately revealed that the patient was a sitting federal judge. Sloan was suspended the same week, but what investigators found next was worse. Every one of Graff's 11 prior complaints had been reviewed and closed at the supervisory level. Every single closure had been signed by Rodney Sloan. For 9 years, Sloan had personally ensured that no complaint against Graff ever moved beyond his desk. Excessive force, verbal abuse, racial targeting, all of it filed and dismissed by the same man who had just sent Graff into a federal judge's hospital room without a warrant. 3 additional supervisors who had co-signed complaint closures were placed under formal review. ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility opened a full internal investigation spanning 5 years of Graff's operations. Every case, every arrest, every closed complaint was reopened. In a rare move, the union that represented ICE agents publicly distanced itself from Graff, issuing a statement saying it could not defend actions that clearly fell outside the bounds of lawful conduct. The collapse was no longer about one hospital room. It was pulling apart an entire chain of command. Judge Jones was discharged from St. Clements 8 days after the incident. Her recovery had been set back by the reopened wound and the trauma of what happened in her room. 2 days after returning home, she released a written statement. It was measured, precise, and devastating. She described being woken from a medicated sleep by 2 armed men who did not identify themselves. She described the confusion of opening her eyes to tactical vests and raised voices, while her body was still connected to monitors and tubes. She described being told she did not have rights. She described the moment an agent grabbed her wrist and pulled, and the pain that followed as her surgical wound tore. Then she wrote the line that would be quoted everywhere. I have spent my career upholding the Constitution from the bench. I never imagined I would have to invoke it from a hospital bed to protect my own body. She confirmed she would cooperate fully with the DOJ investigation and that she was weighing civil action. Legal scholars noted that assaulting a sitting federal judge could constitute a federal crime under statutes protecting judicial officers from interference and physical harm. Civil rights organizations called it one of the most egregious abuses of federal law enforcement power in recent memory. The NAACP called it racial profiling taken to its most extreme conclusion. And across the country, millions of people watched the janitor's 40-second video one more time and saw a black woman in a hospital bed telling a man in a tactical vest that he was hurting her. The Department of Justice announced the charges on a Tuesday morning. Vincent Graff was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, assault of a federal official, and unlawful entry and detention without a warrant. Samuel Denton was charged with aiding the deprivation of rights and failure to intervene. Rodney Sloan was charged with supervisory negligence resulting in civil rights violations and obstruction of justice for his role in systematically burying complaints against Graff over a period of 9 years. All 3 were formally terminated from ICE the same day. Their federal law enforcement credentials were permanently revoked. Their badges, firearms, and agency identification were surrendered. Graff's attorney moved quickly, filing motions to dismiss the charges. His central argument was that the anonymous tip had provided reasonable suspicion and that Graff had acted within the scope of his duties. The federal judge reviewing the motions denied every single one. In her written ruling, she called the argument an insult to the Fourth Amendment and stated that an unverified anonymous tip directed at a hospital patient does not create reasonable suspicion, does not authorize warrantless entry, and does not give any federal agent the right to lay hands on a citizen in a recovery bed. The trial lasted 9 days. The prosecution laid out its case methodically. They played the body camera footage from start to finish. They played the hospital surveillance video showing both agents entering the corridor and Denton blocking the doorway. They played the janitor's 40-second phone recording. They entered into evidence the medical records showing the reopened surgical wound and the trauma-induced cardiac event triggered by the confrontation. Nurse Duval took the stand and described what she saw when she entered that room. Dr. Osei testified about the physical damage caused to his patient. The U.S. Marshals described what they found when they arrived. Then Graff took the stand. He insisted he was following protocol. Under cross-examination, he could not name the protocol. He could not produce a warrant. He could not explain why he ignored a federal judge identifying herself to his face. He was asked about the phrase, "these people," captured on his own body camera seconds before entering the room. He said it wasn't racial. The prosecutor asked him what it meant. He had no answer. The jury was shown the footage one final time. They deliberated for 6 hours. Graff was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 5 years and 4 months in federal prison.
Denton, who had cooperated with investigators and pleaded guilty before trial, received 22 months. Sloan, whose 9-year pattern of burying complaints had enabled everything that happened in that hospital room, received 30 months for obstruction and supervisory negligence. Judge Jones filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, and the individual agents involved. The case cited unlawful detention, assault of a federal official, warrantless entry, racial profiling, and deliberate indifference by supervisory personnel who had enabled years of misconduct. The evidence was so overwhelming that the government's attorneys never let it reach trial. The case settled for $4.6 million, one of the largest individual settlements in a federal civil rights case involving a judicial official. But the money was not the point. The settlement included mandated reforms that would reshape how ICE conducted operations for years to come.
Independent oversight of all field operations involving hospitals and medical facilities. Mandatory warrant requirements before any agent could enter medical premises. A formal review process for all anonymous tips before action could be authorized. And a national audit of every dismissed complaint filed against ICE agents over the previous decade. Judge Jones returned to the bench 4 months after the incident. She walked into her courtroom the same way she always had, composed, prepared, and unwilling to let anyone believe she had been broken by what happened to her. Her first case back involved an immigration detention challenge. She heard the arguments, reviewed the evidence, and ruled from the bench. In her written opinion, she included a single line that was quoted on every network, in every legal journal, and across every corner of the internet where people had followed her story. No badge outranks the Constitution. Not in my courtroom, not in my hospital room, not anywhere. Back at St. Clement's Medical Center, a framed article about the case hung in the third-floor nursing station. Nurse Duval had put it there herself. The janitor's 40-second video reached 11 million views. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.